The College Football Playoff Committee is going to have to look at the eye test over some of the resume gaps. And frankly, right now, some of the metrics between Miami and Notre Dame, they are literally right next to each other on a lot of the metrics. Hello and welcome in. It's always college football. I'm your host, Greg McElroy, and we are so happy to have you here with us again today. It is our second show of the day. We always do our rapid fire reactions. That's based on the results of Fridays and Saturdays games, but we always take a slightly deeper dive here on Sunday evenings. We've gone back, we've watched some of the tape, we've drawn some conclusions. We're looking big picture. What do the outcomes mean? And especially fun version of our 10 takeaway show today is the coaching carousel and the moves that have been made across the college football landscape. If you listened to our show last week, we did a pretty good job, by the way, telling you who was going where, and our sources were very sound, but there were a couple late switcheroos that we will tell you about today. Why they fit, why it makes sense, what led to this decision being made to go here as opposed to here, and of course, the big fish, the big conversation that has captured the attention of the college football world, Lane Kiffin, and his pursuit of a new opportunity down on the Bayou. We will talk about that. What does it mean for LSU? What does it mean for Ole Miss? They now have their permanent head coach moving forward, and there have been a lot of other vacancies that have been announced here in the last few hours as well. So before we get into all of our takeaways, I kindly encourage you and just ask you, if you would, go and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get the podcast. That helps us a lot. We always appreciate the support that you've shown the show. And I know you guys will continue to support the show at a really high level, but it makes it easier to support if you just subscribe to that podcast. You can also check us out on the ESPN College Football YouTube page. So go and check us out there as well. Ton of cut-ups. I would imagine this show will be cut up 1,000 different ways because there's a lot of schools that are impacted by some of the content here tonight. We will kick things off with the biggest story in college football, Lane Kiffin becoming an LSU Tiger. Okay, takeaway number one, Lane Kiffin is heading to the Bayou. Now, sources have told ESPN, and sources told me about a week ago this was done. That's why I told you this last week. There was a while there, by the way, quite a while, where it looked like Lane Kiffin's acceptance of the Florida job was imminent. That was where he initially was looking. That was pretty much according to people in the know at Florida, whether it's high-profile boosters, I think the administration, a lot of people in the coaching search world, a lot of agents, they thought that Florida was where he was heading. And there at the 11th hour, maybe not the 11th hour, maybe the 6th or 7th hour, things started to change a little bit. He took those visits. He looked at everything around Gainesville, looked at everything around Baton Rouge, the access to talent, the resources, all this other stuff. He just felt like LSU was a little bit closer to being able to accomplish the goals that he wants for his program, his future program. And that's why he decided to leave what was a great situation, one that all acknowledged was a great situation, and turned down what was another great opportunity in the Florida Gators. So he's going to make a lot of money. That was never to be in doubt. $12 million or so that can increase with bonuses and with accomplishments. Around 7 years is what they're saying. It sounds like he's going to be a top 3 high-paid coach in college football. The big thing, though, more so than the salary for Lane Kiffin, is the commitment from LSU to provide significant NIL and revenue-sharing funds for the roster construction. They're saying it's floating out there around 25 to 30 million annually that will be paid to the roster, which is pretty dang competitive in the landscape. Now, remember, with revenue sharing, it's a little different now. So it's going to have to be authentic NIL. The good news for LSU is that when I go to Baton Rouge, and I've gone many times, just so you know, Garrett Nussmeier is on every commercial. Every commercial. He's on every billboard. So authentic NIL in Baton Rouge and around the state of Louisiana is real because they're the biggest show in town. And it makes a lot of sense why they can actually get there and that NIL will be legitimate. the war chest will definitely be more significant than what he's had access to in the past, even though Ole Miss has been great there as well. But the difference now between Ole Miss and LSU, wondering this, and I think people are having a hard time understanding, in the modern era, now when you can pay players and you can utilize the portal, why would you leave a great situation for another great situation? What's the difference between Ole Miss and LSU? Like, Ole Miss can pay players just like LSU can. So what's the difference? Well, the difference is at a few places, and this is talking to coaches, this is talking to agents, this is talking to people that are very much in the know and the people that are ultimately making these decisions. The difference between Ole Miss and LSU is the ability to consistently sign top 5 high school recruiting classes. That's the biggest difference. At Ole Miss, it was a heavy reliance on the transfer portal. And if you are constantly living with a heavy reliance on the transfer portal, you run the risk of having those bottom out seasons, like we've seen at many places. Teams have gone heavy in the portal in the past. For example, Florida State, probably the best example, where they can be really, really high, too high for the highs and too low for the lows. When you are that reliant on the portal, you could experience peaks and valleys. Now, Ole Miss hasn't the last few years. 3 straight seasons of 10-plus win seasons, 3 straight great years, an 11-win season this year, a college football playoff berth. All that is fantastic. But if you rely as hard on the portal as Ole Miss did, you always run the risk of a 4-8 potentially being in there as well. And if you listen to guys like Nick Saban, coaches that know, LSU is one of the few places where you can basically almost exclusively sign elite high school talent and supplement your roster with the portal, as opposed to relying almost exclusively on portal additions year in and year out. And if you look at where things are, a long-term deal of about $90 million, and where he's at with the recruitment and all these other things, it makes sense. And this made a ton of sense too for Florida, for Ole Miss, and for LSU. The reason why Lane Kiffin was the most hotly pursued coach probably in recent history, because it provides immediate relevance. I mean, the second he walks in the door, you are going to dominate the national news cycle, which is big. You're going to have a really compelling offensive identity because Kiffin wants to use a hyper-speed offense that is fun. It's fun to watch, especially for Florida, who have long been searching for the fun and gun mentality. And if you look at the personnel that LSU's had in recent years at quarterback in particular, they've always had great wideouts, and they've recently had great quarterback play as well. And I think when you look at where the rosters are right now, there's still so much talent on that roster for the LSU Tigers. And this created a bit of a 3-team tug of war, right? And I also think too, and I told you this when Brian Kelly was fired, and this is my own assumption, okay? Brian Kelly did not deserve to be fired this year, right? Based on where they were at that time. Now, the team had underperformed. The team was playing poor football. The offense had regressed significantly. But based on body of work, did Brian Kelly deserve to be fired? Probably not. You might disagree with me, but I am of the belief, and I told you this the day he got fired, this felt a lot like the Kirby Smart situation in 2015, where Georgia had a pretty decent situation. Now, they hadn't gotten over the top, but they had a good situation with Mark Richt as their head coach, right? It's not like Georgia was in a terrible spot with Mark Richt leading their program. So it's not like LSU was in a terrible spot with Brian Kelly leading their program. But here's the problem. South Carolina in 2015 had a job opening. And guess who the priority candidate was for South Carolina that year? It was Kirby Smart, which prompted Georgia to get rid of Mark Richt so that they could go hire Kirby Smart. I think the reason why Brian Kelly was fired is because Florida fired Billy Napier, and they knew at LSU, hey, we don't want to do this just yet, but we're now forced to, because the last thing we want is to see the guy that we ultimately want coaching at our bitter rival. So this is all married together. And the unfortunate thing is that Ole Miss is sitting there and they're countering, and they've done such a great, they've mobilized their NIL collective. They have a tremendous retention package. They could have paid him everything that LSU is paying him, and they offered all this legacy and things like that. So it was a great spot. I just think Lane Kiffin viewed LSU as a plug-and-play opportunity. He viewed the roster as close to being able to compete for a national championship, as opposed to a roster that would need to be rebuilt regularly at Ole Miss and, frankly, at Florida as well. And then as far as cultural fit, this is a passionate fan base. It is a chaotic fan base. And I think the energy that Lane Kiffin experiences, I think he thrives on that energy, on that intensity. And I think it makes sense why he would move into this direction, because he did 6 years at Ole Miss, and it was remarkable. The longest head coaching stop of his career. Like I referenced, they won a ton of games. They had 4 10-win seasons overall. That's tied with Johnny Vaught for the most by a head coach in Ole Miss history. And just off last year's roster, he had 8 players drafted, which is the most for the program in a single year since 1971. And that was the year that Arch Manning came out too. Now, this is the 10th different person to coach at different SEC schools in consecutive years, but he'd be the 3rd to leave Ole Miss for another SEC job. Red Drew left Ole Miss for Alabama in 1946, and Tommy Tuberville left Ole Miss for Auburn in 1999. It's the only SEC school that has seen multiple coaches bolt for another job, and that's very, very unfortunate. And we haven't seen this in the league since 2017, when Dan Mullen left Mississippi State to become the head coach at Florida. So you hate this for Ole Miss. We'll talk about them here in just a little bit, because the implications of the college football playoff. We've seen coaches forever leave teams before bowl games. That's not new. But leaving a team before a college football playoff run is new and uncomfortable, isn't it? It's really messed up. And it's not something that Lane Kiffin wanted. Lane Kiffin wanted to coach his team, and the administration at Ole Miss decided to go in a different direction. They felt like there was too much of a conflict of interest for Lane Kiffin to stay, coach the playoff, because the transfer portal opens on January 2nd. They were concerned that he would spend that time prepping for the playoff and recruiting his own Ole Miss roster to follow him to LSU. And I understand that completely. And I get why they decided to move in a different direction. But what I'm most pleased with how Ole Miss has handled this is that in an effort to create some continuity, they just promoted Pete Golding right now. Hey, you're our guy. What we're doing here has worked. Let's keep this trainer rolling. So now it's a cleaner break with Lane Kiffin, who can now go pursue his opportunity at LSU. And we have our guy in place that we are now going to follow throughout the playoff and then into the future for the program. So I didn't like at all initially the idea of Lane Kiffin leaving and not being allowed to coach, and then them just having an interim tag. But the fact that they said right now, hey, it's Golding, I actually agree with how Keith Carter has decided to handle this. I hate it for Ole Miss. I hate it for LSU. I hate it for Lane Kiffin, but it's the best decision for both parties. And one extra conversation about this now has turned up the rivalry between LSU and Ole Miss, the Magnolia Bowl. It was always a heated rival. This now moves it into what might be the most toxic feud in college football. Is that fair? And I think Lane Kiffin will fully embrace the heel role now taken over in Baton Rouge. He will become public enemy number 1 in Oxford. You thought Dan Mullen or maybe Tommy Tuberville was that guy? No more. He might be in the pantheon of Mississippi sports villains after this move. So massive move, but I think handled the best possible way by Ole Miss in the near term. And I think for Lane Kiffin, it makes sense for him to take this job because it is one of the greatest jobs in the entire country. Takeaway number 2. This is going to sound ridiculous, and I understand that. This team won the national championship last year, correct? And they are in the midst of what's been a pretty remarkable 16-game win streak, including that national championship victory. And yet, takeaway number 2 is Ohio State is just different this year, are they not? And I know, look, they snap a 4-game losing streak against Michigan, the longest drought that we've seen since the late 80s, early 90s. And they were in a bit of a hole there early. And I had talked in our breakdown, our preview show, that the start in this game was massive. It was really important for Ohio State because if for whatever reason they got off to a poor start and they're sitting there in a bit of a wrestling match and it's tight, and as the game goes along, it could get a little tighter. I said that would not be good for the psyche of Ohio State. It wouldn't, because then you get tight, you start to worry, oh goodness, here we go again, right? Well, they're sitting there in a 6-0 deficit to beat the school up north. They just flip it immediately, man. Their 11th straight win by 15 plus points. That's the longest streak in program history. They are the only team in the FBS this year that has not allowed 20 points in the game this season. So we're just listing off the things that are ridiculous about this team. And they are the first team to allow 16 or fewer points in their first 12 games since 1975. That is 50 years since the team has performed this well on the defensive side of the football. What I love most, too, is Ohio State has been evolving into this point. Like, we've kind of talked about this for a bit. Ohio State has long had great quarterback play. They have long had elite personnel at wide receiver. That's not uncommon. That's not unusual. That's been Ohio State's bread and butter for the last 20 years. But if you look at this game, they basically said, we are going to out Michigan here, but yet we still have elite weapons at wide receiver and at quarterback. But to go out and rush for nearly 200 against a team that is really committed and quality when it comes to stopping the run. And we always know that the Ohio State-Michigan game, whoever outrushes the other team is going to be in a really good spot. That was the 24th straight Ohio State-Michigan game in which the winner outrushed the loser. So that's been the calling card of this matchup for a long time. But Julian Sayin, he, I think, embodied this bounce back as much as anybody. Early interception, gets baited into coverage. Martindale confuses him. Completely unfazed by it. And how about the return of Carnell Tate? I mean, 3-game absence, no big deal. Come right back, pick up right where you left off, go 5 for 82, including the game-breaking touchdown there in the third quarter that basically put the game on ice. And Jeremiah Smith, you could tell him he's not at 100% right now, a little bit of a lingering injury. Still see those incredible capabilities down the right sideline on the deep touchdown, right? Perfectly placed ball right over the defender. And I know a lot of people up in arms about whether it was a touchdown or not. Guys, the Michigan scored 7 points. Whether it was a fumble or not, I don't think it changes the overall outcome. I thought it was a touchdown, but then again, I can understand why people thought it wasn't because of the bobbling and the timing and all that stuff. And I don't like it when it rolls out of the back of the end zone anyways. It's a ridiculous rule. Never liked it. But his gamesmanship, just the attitude of the team, Bo Jackson, how he ran the ball, he was amazing, not just running it, but also had some contributions in the passing game as well. And you just look at everything about what Ryan Day has done. Now, I know his record overall against Michigan is just 2-4. Okay. And he hadn't beaten him since his first season as the head coach back in 2019. And look what he's done against everybody else. I mean, he's 77-6 against everybody not named Michigan. Well, now he has solved that problem. But this was big for several reasons. One, it's the end of a psychological blockade. Because, yes, I think you could point to 2022 and to 2023 and say that Michigan team, that personnel on that Michigan team, probably slightly superior in some spots to Ohio State at certain positions. Okay. But most of the other games, 21, for example, 24 last year, obviously, Ohio State had a better team, they had better personnel. So a lot of having to just win this game was overcoming these psychological challenges that centered around the playing to the level of the competition and being tight against your arch rivals. And this is a senior class that had never beaten Michigan and a fan base that was remarkably restless and understandably so. So this was a validation point for the program's direction going forward and maybe not focusing so much on the Michigan game. hey, it's just another game. It's just like every other game we play in the Big Ten. Guess what? We got to win this one just like we got to win the game against Minnesota or at Washington or against Penn State at home. Like, we got to win all these games. They're all the same. They all count the same if the ultimate goal is to get to the Big Ten championship, which is every team's goal, and to win the Big Ten championship. And then once you do that, the rest is history. We know the championship path is now secured, by the way. They'll face off against the Indiana Hoosiers next week. And I think this performance, again, it kind of reignited the conversation centering around Julian Sand as it relates to the Heisman. I mean, a really clean, solid performance, downfield throws, very accurate in weather. Pretty dang impressive. And I also, too, I don't know if you guys sense this, but when I'm watching this Ohio State team, there's a certain nastiness about them. Yeah, there's a couple things that I think you could do without, gestures and things like that. But this is a nasty, more defiant Ohio State team. Doesn't it feel that way? Like, they're just defiant. They've shed every other label that people have long kind of put on them and their coach and their style. Like, it's all a thing of the past. And it was very, very impressive. So to think the Wolverines held without a touchdown for the first time in over a decade. The 64 passing yards given up, pretty remarkable. Obviously, they threw just 62 yards last year in the win against Ohio State, but to have just 9 points, that's their fewest against Ohio State since 2010. And if you look at Michigan, we're not going to spend a ton of time on them. That they kind of just got smashed. And there were some things early that I liked with their run game. There were some things that they had in the run game, especially being able to kind of gap up this defense, but it just never really was able to kind of get going. You get guys banged up, running backs get banged up, and now all of a sudden you're leaning on a true freshman quarterback, which is going to be a challenge, and he's going to complete less than 50% of his passes against a group like that. So Michigan, good, solid season. I think rock solid season, but it was a bad matchup for them in this game because of how different Ohio State has become over the last, 12 months. Takeaway number three. If Texas makes the playoff, they'd be a dangerous team. Now, I don't know, and we're going to kind of document their candidacy here in just a minute, but I do believe that this is a team that is kind of hitting their stride in a lot of different ways. And it really happened in this game because they didn't play great in the first half. There was a lot that was left on the field. Arch Manning and the offensive line kind of struggled because he was getting hit. He's having to move. He missed a couple throws. They were very aggressive, trying to throw the ball down the field, like big play, big play, big play. And then at halftime, they're like, guys, forget about it, man. We're sitting there 10-3. We're down. Let's just lean on the run game. Like, let's make them stop the run. And if they can, great. Then we'll get back to our first half game plan. We're trying to throw it all over the yard and create big plays and take advantage of corners that might be gettable. That was kind of the plan, I think, for Texas going into this game. Well, now you kind of realize at halftime, maybe that's our identity going forward. Maybe this is a run-first football team, and we just hadn't known it yet. Maybe that's actually what they might be able to do best. And it took them 11 and a half games to get to that point because, let's be real, the offensive line's been in flux. They've moved some pieces around. I think they've gotten more stability at left guard with moving their center to left guard. You insert a veteran at center. Like, those guys have played good football. The tackles have been decent. Like, if you look at the offense and the offensive line, you're only going to go as your quarterback goes. You're only going to go as your offensive line goes. Well, it appears like both those positions are playing their best football of the season. I mean, you're sitting there in the third quarter, starting to run the ball a little bit, and they somehow find a way to improve their protection. And Arch Manning did a better job of being decisive. He did a pretty good job with his legs early in this game, taken off when he was unaccounted for, picked up a couple third down conversions as a result. But his legs became a huge problem, and it had a huge impact on the eyes of the Texas A&M defenders. For example, the 29-yard touchdown pass to Ryan Ringo in the back of the end zone was entirely because a safety who was 15, 20 yards downfield, his eyes were in the backfield on Arch the whole time, and he took 3 or 4 steps forward because he thought Arch was going to take off. And the next thing you know, Wingo's behind him, makes an unbelievable catch there in the back of the end zone. And that touchdown did a lot more than just tie the game. It kind of gave it just woke up Arch Manning. It woke up the Texas offense, and they were completely different from that point forward. And they're sitting there. It's a 3-point game. I mean, the Aggies had just scored. Texas had just gone 3 and out. They kind of needed to put a drive together. There's 7 minutes left. They're up 3. Arch Manning runs the ball right up the middle, unaccounted for in the gaps defensively, creases it, and takes it by making a guy or two miss 35 yards to the end zone. That was a defining moment for, I think, Arch Manning's season. And he's been pretty decent this year with his legs. Not as much here in the last few weeks. He hadn't run the ball as much since the concussion that he suffered against Mississippi State. Well, now he reminded everybody, hey, that's a big part of what I do. And I think this was kind of an arrival moment for him. This was a bit of a signature moment for him in his college career so far. Early, right? Just 12 starts in, but this is a big moment for him to deliver a clutch 35-yard touchdown run, to make some great moves in the pocket, to throw the ball and negotiate defenders. That's a great defense that he was playing against. And a very difficult defense on opposing quarterbacks. I thought he passed that test beautifully. He really did. I was very, very impressed and proud of the performance that he put forth. And I think he should be proud of himself as well. As far as their run game is concerned, I think there's areas to continue to grow there. And if you look at this too, the playoff conversation will be a big piece of this when it comes to the Texas Longhorns. Have their playoff hopes been resuscitated? Maybe, but I still think they need some help. And I don't know if they got enough help in the results of this weekend to climb their way into the top 10, because that's likely what it's going to require for them to make the 12-team college football field, because the conference champions that will likely occupy the 11th and the 12th seed. We'll get into that here in just a bit. But they do have 3 wins against really high-quality opponents this year. They've beaten Oklahoma, very impressive win. They've beaten Texas A&M. That's 2 teams that are probably going to be ranked in the College Football Playoff Committee's top 7, top 8 at the absolute worst. So you got those 2 wins. Now you're looking at things with Vanderbilt, where Texas beat them convincingly. You'll look at the final score and you'll think, I don't know. Was it convincing? Well, if you look at the first 3 quarters, Texas busted 2 coverages, led to big plays for Vanderbilt there in the fourth quarter. So that final score looked pretty close, but in reality, it really wasn't that close if you look at a vast majority of that ball game. So will they get in? Probably not. But to have a win against A&M, to have a win against Vanderbilt, to have a win against Oklahoma, sitting right in front of them are Notre Dame, who's still in a really good position, and the committee clearly likes the Irish. The Miami Hurricanes, who are sitting there in a pretty good spot too after another convincing victory at the hands of Pitt. And then Utah, little bit of a dogfight. That game between them and Kansas was a little closer than you recognize. I feel like Utah has continually been slightly overvalued in this whole conversation, but Texas's strength of record is actually better than each of those 3 teams. And they are also right there with the Vanderbilt team that they beat head-to-head as far as strength of record is concerned. They also had the one loss to Ohio State that when other teams are playing powder puffs, look at, for example, and this is no disrespect to Indiana, their schedule's their schedule, and they're a great football team, and I love them. But if Texas would have adopted Indiana's non-conference philosophy, they'd be sitting there 10-2, and I think in all likelihood they'd be in the field. Yes, you can't lose to an unranked Florida team that finished the season 3-8. You can't do that. And their strength of record metric, they are outside the top 10 as well. So that would be difficult to kind of make a case on their behalf. But I think this is a dangerous team. If they somehow find a way to get in, and like I said, I don't think it's likely, that's not a team that you'd want to face in December, and I don't think that's a team you'd want to face in January. As far as A&M is concerned, it's a little bit frustrating to see some of the limitations offensively. The inability to really create opportunities on the ground. I thought Marcel Reed looked uncomfortable throughout most of the night. There was pressure, threw a couple picks. They need to kind of settle him down. I think they need to be a little more patient with the run game. If they can do that, they got a chance. And for whatever reason, their 2 best attributes, those 2 wide receivers, KC Concepcion and Mario Craver, at times they kind of disappeared in the plan. That can never happen. Not with the quality that those guys have on every single snap. But 11-1, they feel great about it, but very disappointing outcome for Texas A&M, who desperately wanted to make it to the SEC championship game for their program. They'd never been there before. They wanted to win that game. They were highly motivated to get there, and they had by far their worst performance of the day, by far their worst performance of the season when evaluating their 12-game body of work. They're still 11-1, probably still going to get a home playoff game, but I think you can probably kiss that first round bye goodbye as a result of this outcome. Takeaway number 4. Alabama just continues to grind out wins. They've now won their 6th straight Iron Bowl. They beat Auburn 27-20, even though they were outgained by nearly 130 yards. And it was the worst yardage differential in any game since the 2017 national championship game. That was the 2016 season. So January of 2017, that was the last time there was a differential that was this significant. They lost that game, so this was their worst yardage differential in a win since 2008. But it was all about fourth down. There have been so many times this year for Alabama, their performance and their victories are often secured by fourth down gambles by their head coach. Kalen DeBoer, he's got his team at the Auburn 6-yard line. They've put together an unbelievable drive to get down to that point. The game's tied 20-20. You got 4th and 2. A lot of people would be thinking to themselves, you know what? Hey, let's just kick it, get ourselves a couple-point lead. But Alabama's kicking situation hasn't been great. It hasn't been great at all. So to go up 23-20 was not a guarantee by any stretch of the imagination. They've had issues with snapping. They've had issues with holding. And Talty, their kicker, had been far from a guarantee. So he decides to go for it. They run in a very similar play to what they ran earlier in the year against Missouri on a 4th down in similar situation. That was a 4th and 1 at the 1 or 2 yard line. Maybe it was a 4th and 2 from the 2 yard line. This was a 4th and 2 from the 6 yard line. They could have hit a guy in the flat. Instead, he was covered. You saw poise on display from Ty Simpson. So you look at the numbers from Ty Simpson. The numbers are not going to blow you away at 19 of 35 for 122 by any stretch. His longest completion was just 16 yards. But in gotta have it moments, he made great plays. 2 of the 3 touchdowns to Isaiah Horton were really well thrown balls. One in the back of the end zone, one between 2 defenders after getting off his first, second, and all the way to the 3rd guy in the progression. Very, very impressive. And this is now his 4th game with 3 passing touchdowns and 0 interceptions. The big part for Ty Simpson and for Alabama as a whole has been don't make mistakes. The defense has played great most of the season. Don't make mistakes. If you don't make mistakes, you're probably going to be in a pretty good spot. They made them against Oklahoma and lost the game as a result. This game was about limiting the opportunities that Auburn had offensively with the short field if you just take care of the football. So it was not an aggressive plan. It was not a plan where they really wanted to light up the scoreboard. They didn't need to. They just had to avoid the critical error. And I think that's why the numbers were very pedestrian. You look to it, some of the run game, not great, right? Not great as far as the run game's concerned, but there were moments against a great rushing defense where they were getting 3, 4, 5 yards a pop. That's not a bad place to start. You've got to find more efficiency on some downfield throws. Ty on throws that traveled 10 yards plus downfield was just 2 of 11 for 31 yards. But you got to like very much him being able to stand in there and take some of the hits that he took because he got pressured on nearly half of his dropbacks. That's a lot. He dropped back 40 times in this ball game. He got pressured on 18 of those 40. That's a bunch. And on those pressures, he was just 3 of 13 for 31. He was sacked 3 times. He got hit 6 times. So they got to do a little bit better job moving forward with how they protect. But this is a really good defensive front. I think they held up okay. Stars of the game had to be Isaiah Horton, one of the best games of his career. Just the 3rd Alabama player in the last 30 years with 3 receiving touchdowns in the Iron Bowl. And the 2 guys that did it before him, Jalen Waddle in 2019 and Amari Cooper in 2014, both those guys went on to become first-round picks. So a very impressive performance from Horton, and the defense, I think, made pivotal plays like they always seem to do. They did give up a couple big plays, which is uncharacteristic, and it was uncomfortable there for a minute, I think, from most people's vantage point if you were on the Alabama side, because Auburn all of a sudden erases a 17-0 deficit. All of a sudden the game is tied. Ty needed to put a drive together, and to find Horton there for the go-ahead score under 4 minutes to go was a really big moment of the game. And I think, man, every game at Auburn is always crazy, right? The last 4 games between these two teams played on the Plains decided by a combined 15 points. Pretty crazy when you really think about it. For Auburn, you finished the season 5-7. The loss obviously ends your hopes for bowl eligibility. Heartbreaking finish. Made a couple critical mistakes there on the game-winning drive that led to Alabama winning the game. PIs, roughing the passer, can't happen, right? That extends possessions. So when the game ends with a fumble too by Cam Coleman, can't happen there. You're on the door. It's 30 seconds left. You're at around the 20-yard line. You got to hang on to the football. So big mistakes by Auburn gave Alabama just a window of opportunity to go and get it. They got it. And Alabama now will try their luck against the Georgia Bulldogs, a team they beat earlier in the year in Athens. Now they'll have to do it again to solidify their playoff standing and likely secure probably not a first-round bye, but a first-round home playoff game would be big there in Bryant-Denny. Takeaway number 5. Miami and Notre Dame are both making strong cases to be in the college football playoff. We'll start with Miami. Now, people will say it's kind of like a hollow victory, if you will. I don't know if it was. This was a dominant performance in every possible way. And you take into account, yes, 10-2, not playing in the ACC championship game, probably disappointing, especially when you take into account how talented this roster is and how good they were playing throughout most of the year. Yeah, they had a couple off days. They went out and they lost to Louisville by turning it over 4 times by 3 points. They went out and they lost to SMU where they had a roughing the passer call on 4th and 9. If that roughing the passer call doesn't happen, do they end up winning the game? Who knows? It's a hypothetical and it's not really worth talking about. But to have the most talented roster by a mile in the ACC and not to be playing in Charlotte this upcoming Saturday, has got to be a real gut punch to Mario Cristobal and company, because their fate now lies in the hands of the College Football Playoff Committee, and that committee has not shown them a lot of love here in the first 3 rankings releases. But the combination of SMU losing to Cal, Virginia beating Virginia Tech, Duke defeating Wake Forest, that was a complex situation where Miami could possibly make it, but they needed Duke and or Virginia to lose the game. One or the other, and they would have been in. So just didn't happen for them. Now they are firmly on the, quote, bubble, right? Don't get that automatic bid. They don't get that 13th data point. So the College Football Playoff Committee is going to have to look at the eye test over some of the resume gaps. And frankly, right now, some of the metrics between Miami and Notre Dame, they are literally right next to each other on a lot of the metrics. You look at strength of record, strength of schedule. There's 2 spots between the two on strength of schedule, partly because Miami played a team that was ranked in the top 25 this past weekend. And then on the other side, Notre Dame's playing against a 3-9 Stanford. So Notre Dame has fallen back. Miami's slid up. Now you have to wonder, will these two teams be in the same bubble, the same group that the College Football Playoff Committee chair has been telling us about for the last few weeks? Because if they are in the same group, because the metrics support that, then you start to talk about the head-to-head matchup. And of course, Miami won that game in the first game of the regular season. I think you can also look too at where Miami's at right now as far as injuries. They had several throughout the season. At least 7 starters missed time throughout the regular season. And yet, yes, they lost a couple games that they absolutely shouldn't have. But at the same time, that's been used in other teams' favor. Will it be used in Miami's favor? And their quarterback too, Carson Beck, he's playing probably the best football of the season these last few weeks. Another very surgical performance. Cold weather. It was windy. It was breezy. He was an efficient player in the game, did not make mistakes, had 3 touchdowns, and threw for well over 250 yards. Malachi Toney has been one of the best freshmen in all of college football this season. Another ridiculous performance from him, 13 receptions in the game. He's constantly able to just move the chains, even threw a touchdown in this matchup. The guy's one of the best football players in the sport, and he's only a freshman. I think he's probably locked up freshman of the year. I believe that's the Sean Alexander Award. Yeah, Malachi Toney's probably locked that up with what he's done here throughout this season. And then defensively, Probably the best defensive game of the year from Miami. This is a solid Pitt football team. And they just held them to 7 points. And they were completely overwhelming the offensive line throughout most of the ball game as well. So Miami made a statement in a big way in their performance by beating Pitt worse than Notre Dame beat Pitt the week before. And no one thought that was possible because Notre Dame crushed Pitt just a couple weeks ago. And people are texting me this too. This was a game that Pat Narduzzi, quote, cared about. Like, come on. I think he cared about the Notre Dame game too. But I understand the point that's been made from the Miami vantage point. Notre Dame was amazing as well last night. If you stayed up late enough, I did. I was all in last night. I was watching the game. The final score is not even close to as indicative as how dominant that game was. Jeremiah Love goes out, breaks a program record, been held for 30 years. 21 touchdowns now, has surpassed the single season record previously held by Jerome Bettis. If you're in the same company at running back with Jerome Bettis, pretty good place to be in. There was that scare, though, when he had the bruised ribs, did return, only finished with 66 yards, but either way, he's going to be fine and should be at 100% here in no time, assuming they make the college football playoff. Still love what I'm seeing from CJ Carr. Think he continues to operate the offense very efficiently, did so again in this matchup. And they also showed you, too, with Love being a bit banged up, they reminded everybody just how deep this running back core is. Because, yes, we talk about Jeremiah Love. Yes, we talk about Jadarian Price. We don't talk enough about Aeneas Williams. Like Aeneas Williams is excellent as well. He has 83 yards on the ground and a couple touchdowns. So, did Notre Dame punch their ticket? I don't know that for sure just yet. I think in all likelihood they did, but I cannot say with 100% certainty they'll get in the field just yet. I'll explain why when we talk about the playoff bubble here in just a minute. But they've won 10 straight games. Every single one of those wins has been by double digits. And I think they have pretty much removed any doubt about what this team is capable of when they're playing at the highest levels. The big conversation about Notre Dame is not necessarily whether they be in the field. I think they will be more than likely, but would they get a home game? I'm not sure they will. Not with the way things went with teams 5 through 8 this past weekend, and knowing that A&M is now joining that mix as well. So it's looking like right now for Notre Dame, a lot of the assessment with them is more about the argument being, quote, the best teams. I don't think anyone disagrees. Notre Dame is among the best teams in the sport. If you look at their FPI, their power ratings, they're number 3 right now in power ratings behind Ohio State and Indiana. So if you're going to use the argument of, well, who would be favored against who on a neutral field? Right now, Notre Dame would be favored against pretty much everybody not named Ohio State and Indiana. Pretty good place to be in. They are also 5th when it comes to game control. What is game control? Game control basically is a fancy word for eye test. They're 5th behind Ohio State, Oregon, Texas Tech, and Indiana. So they've been dominant, even with those 2 early season losses. Their strength of record, though, is not great. Their strength of record is 13th, which is obviously outside the 12 that would be in. That is the 4th among 2 lost teams, and actually behind Texas in strength of record argument. So that is a metric that has been used in the past, and their strength of record metric is not very favorable for the Irish. So I think that you should feel really good about making the field, but I don't think at this point it's a complete lock, which leads me to my next takeaway. Takeaway number 6, the college football playoff bubble is the best it's probably ever been. I really think that this is the most because we're talking about quality teams here. Like last year when we were talking about the bubble, right? It was SMU being measured against Bama, Miami, and South Carolina. That was the conversation last year. And to be honest with you, all of those teams were very flawed. Ole Miss was in the mix there as well as a 3-loss team. Now, you look at the eye test, Ole Miss was amazing last year, but they had 3 losses. So did Bama. So did South Carolina. South Carolina lost to Ole Miss and to Bama, and they got beat badly by Ole Miss at home, I might add. Miami was fresh off a loss to Syracuse in the final game of the regular season. And then SMU didn't play anybody throughout the regular season. So the bubble last year was amongst teams that, they make it great. Are they really going to be a factor even if they did make it? Probably not, right? Especially going on the road in the first round of the playoff. This year's bubble conversation is legit because I think, like all of y'all, maybe you don't feel this way, but this is certainly the way I feel. I think Notre Dame's the real deal. I think Miami is the real deal. You catch either one of those two teams on the wrong day, man, like good luck. Like those two teams, they're really dang good, really talented, and a lot of guys that will be playing in the pros on both those rosters. And they can beat you on offense and on defense. They can beat you running it or throwing it. They have quarterbacks that I think can elevate. Like there's a lot to like about those two teams right now, but there's also a lot to like about what we've seen from Vanderbilt, for example, who's got a very strong case to be made too. I don't think Vandy's getting in, by the way, but they go and absolutely house a ranked Tennessee team at Tennessee is their final statement win to the committee. That's the last time we've seen them. So will they make it? Probably not. I don't think the record, I don't think the wins, the fact that they hadn't beat a top 25 team, we'll see where Tennessee falls at 8-4 next week. Will they be in the top 25 according to the College Football Playoff Committee? Probably not. Maybe they will. We'll see. So I don't think Vandy's getting in, but man, that's a good football team. We're comparing teams that, maybe they're not flawless, but they're really good. So as far as the teams that are currently locks, all right, let's go through the locks right now. Ohio State's a lock, right? Regardless of the Big Ten championship game outcome. We all agree with that. Indiana also a lock. They're both 12-0. They're locks. They're in the field. I think they've maybe even locked up a first-round bye with how good those teams have been. So those two teams are locked. Remove them. All right, that's 2. 3, Georgia. I think they're a lock, regardless of what happens in the SEC title game. They're probably going to be the 3 seed next week, according to the College Football Playoff Committee rankings. So they're a lock. They're not going to fall all the way from 3 to 12. That ain't happening. All right, so Georgia, they're a lock. Ole Miss is a lock with just one loss. They're 11-1. Oklahoma, I believe, is a lock at 10-2. They have a win against Bama. Yes, it wasn't pretty. Yes, Oklahoma has flaws on offense, but they are elite on defense. I think they're a lock to make the field right now because they're done. They just won, and they finish off a 10-2 season. So I think Oklahoma's a lock. I think Oregon's a lock, right? So we're at 6 teams right now that are locks, right? We're all on the same page. Oregon takes care of business against Washington, does it impressively, great on defense. And Oregon, I think, sitting at 11-1, should feel really good about where they're at. I think they'll be hosting a home playoff game more than likely. I'd be shocked if they didn't, frankly. You also have Texas A&M, who is also a lock at 11-1. So you have 7 teams this year that are 11-1 or better, all right? Notice I did not say Texas Tech is a lock just yet. I'm not willing to go there just yet. Now, they are a double-digit favorite against BYU in the Big 12 championship. I think the Big 12, if BYU were to win, I think the Big 12 could get 2 in. It's possible, but I don't think it's a guarantee. So as of right now, I am saying that only one Big 12 team is going to be in the field. That's my opinion. We'll see. Maybe BYU wins and it's close. Maybe Texas Tech can stay in, but I could see a scenario where Texas Tech is knocked out. I don't think it's possible. I don't think it's likely, but I do think it's possible. But I cannot right now say with 100% certainty Texas Tech is in the field just yet. So I'm saying Big 12 champ is a lock. Now we're at 8. We know the AAC champion. Notice how I didn't say ACC. I said the AAC. So either Tulane or North Texas. That game in the AAC championship will be played this weekend. The winner of that game is a lock as at worst, the G5 champ, but potentially as the 3rd best conference champ because the SEC champ will get in, the Big 10 champ will get in, and the AAC champ will get in for sure, and the Big 12 champ will get in, right? Well, that leaves one more conference champion to get in. It might be the ACC champ, and it might be the Sun Belt champ. It might be either or. If Duke wins the ACC, I could see James Madison being in front of them. I think in all likelihood they will be. And if James Madison loses for whatever reason, I might even see the Mountain West champ be in front of Duke in the event in which that all works out. So there's our locks. We have the 8 teams the 10 teams already that are locks right now. So Ohio State, Indiana, Georgia, Ole Miss, Oklahoma, Oregon, Texas A&M. That's 7. The AAC champ, that's 8. The Big 12 champ, that's 9. And the ACC/Sun Belt champ, that's 10. That means there's 2 spots left, right? In all likelihood, I think Alabama is also very close to being a lock. I'd be surprised if the committee penalized a team that has to play a 13th game when teams they're being measured against don't. So I think this week we might even see the committee guard against this and move Alabama, even though they just beat a 5-7 Auburn team. It wouldn't surprise me if they moved Alabama in front of Notre Dame in this week's rankings on Tuesday. Wouldn't surprise me at all, because now you can kind of guard against that conversation, because Alabama's playing a 13th game, and it's the same conversation that was made last year on behalf of SMU. If SMU lost the conference championship, were they going to be left out in favor of Bama, Miami, Ole Miss, South Carolina? All four of those teams were sitting there on conference championship Saturday watching games. Meanwhile, SMU is putting it all on the line. I didn't think the committee wanted to create that slippery slope, and I don't think they want to do it this year either. So I think Alabama will be in. So that means there's one spot left. One. And based on last week's playoff rankings, the quote, most underrated team as far as the metrics are concerned is BYU. BYU is sitting there 6th in strength of record, and they're currently 11th in the college football playoff rankings. So they are the most underrated team right now, and we all know that BYU's path is simple. You beat Texas Tech, you're in. But the most overrated teams right now, amongst the current playoff contenders from a metric standpoint, is Texas Tech, who's 5th in the college football playoff committee rankings last week, probably sliding to 4th with the loss to A&M. They are 10th in strength of record. So that's a pretty big gap. And that's why I tell you that I don't know if Texas Tech in defeat this week is a lock still to be in the field. I also look at Notre Dame. They are 9th in the CFP last week. They are now 13th in strength of record. So Texas Tech and Notre Dame, I don't think they're locks just yet. Not saying that they should be, not saying they shouldn't be. I just would not sit right now and book my tickets already to a first round playoff game. Now, 2 of the other 4 spots, of course, will go to conference champions. And right now, using analytics, let's look at what could happen in the event in which BYU and or Alabama win/lose and all these other things. So right now, according to analytics, and take those however you want to take those. I'm fine with however you want to involve them, but I find them interesting, and more often than not, they're pretty good. They're pretty accurate. If BYU loses and Alabama wins, Alabama's of course in as a conference champion. Notre Dame in that scenario would have a 93% chance to be in the field. Miami would have a 4% chance. That is according to the analytics given to me by ESPN. So if Notre Dame's at 93% and Miami's at 4% and we're ignoring the head-to-head, that's a very interesting conversation to be had. Now, in the event in which BYU loses and Alabama loses, Notre Dame would then improve to greater than 99.9%. So basically, BYU and Bama lose, Notre Dame's in. No doubt about it. But it opens the door for Miami, whose odds would then improve to 24% chance. Alabama's odds would go from 99% down to 47%, and that's when the conversation would have to be had. Would we be measuring a team that has the 13th point against a team that doesn't? And how will that all work out? And in the event in which BYU and Alabama both win, as of this moment, the odds to make the field are Texas Tech in that scenario, 90%, Texas A&M, 89%, which is wild because they're sitting right now at 99%. Bama and BYU win. A&M's numbers drop by 10%, and Notre Dame's numbers drop from 93% down to 21%. Of course, Bama and BYU in that scenario would both be in as conference champions. If BYU wins and Alabama loses, like we said, 93% for Notre Dame, 4% for Miami. So a lot still to be considered, a lot still to be acknowledged. But this is a wild time right now when it comes to the bubble conversation. And I think that Miami has a stronger argument than most when it comes to being potentially in the same pod as Notre Dame. And if they're in that same pod, we're going to have a very interesting selection day coming up in about 7 days. Takeaway number 7, we felt like it was appropriate just to do an SEC version of the coaches carousel because there's a lot of interconnectivity as it relates to some of these coaching voids. For nearly 2 months, it was pretty obvious that everyone was going to talk about Lane Kiffin and where he was going. Would the courtship between Florida and Ole Miss and LSU, how would it all shake out? And then what would the trickle-down effect be of all these other places? And frankly, for Florida, we'll start there. It looked like Lane was a done deal for Scott Strickland, the athletic director. It looked like things were going in a great spot for him. And then the immediate pivot to John Summerall, this could not have been a better pivot, in my opinion. I know people will point to some of the negatives. Look, no Power 4 head coaching experience, but he has a remarkable record of immediate turnarounds. And while you might not have the, quote, celebrity that you would have had you gotten Lane Kiffin, the program will focus very much on structural discipline, on cultural intensity, and a guy that's done a great job in modernizing his roster in the last few years at both Troy and at Tulane. But before we go forward, we must first go back to 2021. And that was when Billy Napier was hired in Gainesville. In late 2021, he arrived with a reputation as a meticulous organizer, a disciple of Nick Saban, a process-oriented coach, and a guy that had won a lot of games at Louisiana Lafayette, a lot of games. And his mandate was to kind of rebuild the infrastructure of the Florida program. And they had things had frayed under Dan Mullen prior to. And his approach is very deliberate. He hired a big support staff. He emphasized culture over the immediate gratification that you would have by leaning heavily into the portal. However, kind of that slow build philosophy, it constantly it just wouldn't allow them to really get going. And by the time he's sitting there at 3-4 in 2025, and he was 22-23 overall, the win percentage was atrocious, the worst that we've seen from a Florida coach since the World War II. His demeanor, he was kind of stoic, heavily reliant on very corporate coach speak. And it stood in kind of stark contrast to the very fiery personas that we'd seen have great success at Florida with Steve Spurrier and Urban Meyer. And there were a lot of detractors as a result of Billy Napier. But once Lane Kiffin was officially off the table, Scott Strickland had, I don't want to call it a crisis, but he had to go and find somebody. He needed a candidate that could win. And this was a fan base that was relatively skeptical. And he needed to turn the narrative here into, hey, this is a winner, as opposed to a consolation prize, if you will. And I love what they were able to do here by going and hiring John Summerall. He has an uncanny resemblance in his track record to one of the best coaches of the modern era in Urban Meyer. And there's a lot of people that are, this is Urban Meyer 2.0. And you look at it, even in the official announcement. I mean, Strickland invoked names like Urban Meyer and Brian Kelly and Willie Fritz. And this is a messaging strategy, right? Because he's done a remarkable job turning things around. Let's start at Troy when he got his first head coaching job in 2022, a program that had 3 consecutive losing seasons prior to his arrival. Well, he gets there. They immediately go 12-2. They become the Sun Belt Conference champion, right? And it backed it up the following year with an 11-3 record and a second consecutive conference title in 23. And under his guidance, the defense, they became a juggernaut and were among the top tier in the G5 in points and for yards and all this other stuff. And then he decides to take it over to Tulane following Willie Fritz, and just right out of the gate leads them to a 9-5 record, an AAC championship game appearance in the first season. And then they broke through after losing their quarterback and their running back. They broke through and they're better than they were a year ago, 10-2 overall, 7-1 in the AAC. They not only are playing for a conference title, but they might secure a spot in the college football playoff as well. And while his contract is substantial, it's less burdensome than what you would have had to pay had you landed Lane Kiffin. He signed a 6-year deal worth about $7.5 million annually, about $45 million in total. And that's a $5 million difference annually that you would have had to pay Kiffin that you can now pay Summerall, that might be able to go into the GM and to the assistant coaching pool. And I think Summerall said a big priority for him is assembling an incredible cast. And that financial delta, if you will, does provide him some ammunition to go out and get elite coordinators because, at Florida, man, having an explosive offense, Summerall himself said having an explosive offense is not optional, it's mandatory, right? So now that Summerall is over at Florida, which I think is a great hire, and now that Lane Kiffin is off to LSU, Ole Miss had just one choice. They had to promote Pete Golding. Now, they could kick the tires on a few other candidates, but to have an interim during maybe the most important 3-4 game stretch in your program's history, I think would have been a big mistake. So they decided to just hire Pete Golding right now. He's got great energy. He's done a really good job with their defense the last few years. He comes from the Nick Saban tree, but he's also now coached under Lane Kiffin, so he knows the importance of playing at a high level offensively. Probably still going to call the plays defensively. And one thing I think this does for Ole Miss, and we've seen this happen in the past as well, when one guy leaves a certain place, it can create a bit of a galvanizing effect amongst the fan base. They can create a galvanizing effect amongst the resources that start to pour in. When a guy leaves, a lot of people now come out of the woodwork and say, oh, well, I'll show you. And that might be a great outcome for Ole Miss here moving forward. Because look at what happened with Notre Dame. When Brian Kelly left Notre Dame to go to Baton Rouge and basically citing that, hey, it's easier to win a national championship at LSU than it is at Notre Dame. Well, they decide to promote Marcus Freeman. All of a sudden, resources come pouring into the program. Hurdles that once existed started to disappear. And now Notre Dame is one of the best jobs, one of the best teams, one of the best programs in the entire sport. The same could also be said at Oklahoma. Lincoln Riley leaves to go take the job at USC. All of a sudden, they don't promote from within. They go get Venables, which had done a great job coaching defense at Clemson, and then prior to at Oklahoma, had been around that program for a very long time. All of a sudden, resources go all in, and now Oklahoma finds himself in the college football playoffs. So this might end up being a great thing for Ole Miss if they can make sure they get the offensive coordinator hire right. That's the biggest key for Pete Golding here moving forward. Now that Summerall was going to Florida, Auburn's challenges became very real because I can tell you with certainty there were people in the industry that had basically said the Auburn job's taken, Summerall's going there. It's done. Well, that wasn't the case. And we'll find out maybe more about this pursuit by Auburn of John Summerall and maybe where they maybe made a mistake or two in trying to pursue him. But once he was off the table, I thought it was a really good pivot to go with John Cohen, their AD, and hire Alex Golesh. Now, there was a lot of buzz building about DJ Durkin having the interim tag removed. Now, had he beaten Vanderbilt, had he beaten Alabama, I think in all likelihood, DJ Durkin would be the head coach of the Auburn Tigers, but he didn't win either. So once Summerall was off the table and Durkin was no longer hireable as the head coach, they immediately went out and got a guy that I think has done a tremendous job at USF over the last couple of years. He signs a 6-year deal now. His overall record is not going to blow you away. He's just 23-15 in 3 years at South Florida, but just coached the Bulls to a 9-3 record, their best season since 2017. And he's going to bring a really exciting offense to the Plains. They were number 2 this season in yards per game, number 4 in scoring offense in the FBS. They opened their season by dominating Boise State. They also beat Florida. They rose at one point all the way into the top 18 of the AP poll with a 6-1 start. Their only loss came to Miami in that 6-1 start. And we all know that Miami was a great team at that point as well. Then they lost to Memphis and to Navy to knock them out of the playoff hunt. But this is a guy that inherited a USF program that was 1-11. And they had a winless run through the AAC conference, AA conference, the American Athletic Conference in 2022. And they'd won just 4 games in the previous 3 years under their previous head coach, Jeff Scott. So he pulled a quick turnaround and it became a very exciting offense to watch. And if you haven't watched USF, what you're going to see is essentially Tennessee. He coached at Tennessee as the offensive coordinator. He was also the tight ends coach under Josh Heupel in 21 and in 2022. And it looked like had Summerall gone to Auburn. Golish was probably going to Arkansas. So I'm telling you, these guys were all connected and it was wild. So that leads us to Arkansas. They've decided to hire Ryan Silverfield as their new head coach. Now, he was at Memphis for a while now, 50-25. And he also beat Arkansas in September, ironically. He has 4 consecutive wins against Power 4 opponents, including West Virginia and Iowa State in bowl games the last 2 years. And he'll replace Sam Pittman. And Bobby Petrino replaced Sam Pittman in the interim basis. But Silverfield's been at Memphis since 2016 and was the head coach in 2019 when Mike Norvell left Memphis to become the head coach at Florida State. He's been to the Cotton Bowl that year. He's won 8 or more games in 4 of his 6 full seasons with the Tigers, and he's coached offensive line. And what have we known about Arkansas in the past? Like, they love their offensive linemen, and that's Silverfield's, that's his background. He's also been in the NFL too with the Lions and with the Vikings, coached and spent time at Arizona State and has done a pretty good job at Memphis. So I put all those SEC coaching carousels together because they frankly all impacted each other. Everyone was going after the same group, and it became a game of musical chairs. But frankly, I think all ended up in pretty good situations, given the uncertainty there for just a little bit. We'll go next to takeaway number 8. Let's go national with the coaching carousel now, if you will. I'm hearing more and more buzz about Kalani Sitake at Penn State. You're probably thinking, like me, the fit doesn't really, I love Kalani Sitake. He's one of my favorite coaches. He's tough as nails. Great coach, done a tremendous job at his alma mater in BYU, but there's a lot of buzz about that. I just want to put that out there. We're not going to talk about it yet because it sounds like nothing can even be said about this until Friday, but sounding like he might be the guy for the Nittany Lions, which is fascinating nonetheless. We've already talked about Oklahoma State. If you missed it, go back and check out our show from a few days ago. Eric Morris was hired from North Texas, and a lot of people were in pursuit of Morris, by the way. He decides to take Oklahoma State, which is a much better job than people realize. Stanford has decided to hire Tavita Pritchard to be their next head coach. He was a quarterback at Stanford. He also spent time as a coordinator there. He's also spent time as an assistant coach, but most recently, he was with the Washington Commanders. And he did a really good job coaching Jaden Daniels to one of the best rookie seasons we've ever seen. So the funny thing is that Andrew Luck was involved in this entire coaching search. Well, Tavita Pritchard and Andrew Luck were on the same team. They competed against each other in 2009 for the starting quarterback job. And frankly, I spent time with Andrew in 2011 at the Heisman Trophy ceremony. Guess who was hanging out with us? It was Andrew, me, and Tavita. So this made sense. And we had told you it sounded like Stanford was going to go to the NFL, but they not only go to the NFL and get a good quarterback mind, they also get a guy that is an alumnus and led Stanford to maybe the highest point from an underdog standpoint of their entire history. He led Stanford to that 24-23 victory upset of number 2 USC back in 2007 when they were a 41-point underdog in that game. And Tavita Pritchard started that game and threw a 10-yard touchdown pass to win the game on 4th down with under a minute to play. Fascinating stuff there. UCLA, it's sounding like all their attention is focused on Bob Chesney. We explained why in our show last week. Virginia Tech, as you know, hired James Franklin, which made a ton of sense, especially when you take into account how good he's been at recruiting the state of Virginia and recruiting the D.C. and Maryland area, just the DMV in general. He's done a really good job there. And then lastly, Jonathan Smith was fired today at Michigan State. They decided that it was time. He had originally, a couple years ago, signed a $52 million contract. His buyout is north of $30 million, but it was kind of understandable. There's a new athletic director at Michigan State, Jay Batt, and Jonathan Smith was just 9-15 in his 2 years with the Michigan State Spartans. He inherited a team that was 4-8, and they started 3-0 in 24 before finishing 5-7 and 3-6 in the Big Ten, but they bottomed out this year, going just 1-8 in the Big Ten. They won just one game, and that was against Maryland on Saturday. 0-6 against ranked competition, and the teams in those games were outscored by nearly 140 points. So that is unfortunate as well. They are already moving quickly there. There are reports out there that Pat Fitzgerald, former head coach at Northwestern, compiled a 110 and 101 record at Northwestern in 17 seasons with his alma mater. He was there from 2006 to 2022. It sounds like they've already zeroed in on him. He was an all Big Ten linebacker for Northwestern for a long time, a consensus All-American. And as a coach, he won the Big Ten West at Northwestern in 2018 and was the Big Ten Coach of the Year. So he got fired in 23 due to a hazing scandal. And ultimately, once they dug in and did some due diligence, he filed a wrongful termination lawsuit and was awarded a private amount. But let me just tell you, it was a lot of money, because he was found to have no involvement whatsoever. They settled out of court. Fitzgerald has long denied any knowledge of the hazing scandal. And based on the people I talked to, it sounds like there was nothing that he did to be involved in that. So he is now back after being out of college coaching for 3 seasons. And he was 5-9 against Michigan State during his tenure at Northwestern. So fascinating stuff, absolutely fascinating stuff with what's going on right now in the coaching carousel. Takeaway number 9. We have spent a lot of time talking about coach movement, transfer portal. It's our bread and butter. But guys, I cannot emphasize this takeaway enough. The calendar for college football needs to change, okay? The current college football calendar, when you talk to administrators, you talk to fans, you talk to coaches, it's broken. I mean, that's what it is. It is broken. There are massive events that are going on in December. You got conference championships, you got the transfer portal opening, you got National Signing Day, you got the coaching carousel, and it's all crammed into about 5 or 6 weeks. The result is what transpired this week. And that was with Lane Kiffin leaving a playoff-bound Ole Miss team for a bitter rival, which forces Ole Miss to hire the coach. They've kind of put them in a difficult spot naturally. Now Lane's not going to be there to play with his guys to go chase a championship because of the conflict of interest there. Everybody has come out and said this. Nick Saban said this. Eli Drinkwitz has said this. Eli Drinkwitz said this, and he was one of the beneficiaries of the chaos that is December because Bo Pribula, his starting quarterback, who was the backup at Penn State last year, he wasn't able to play for Penn State in the playoffs because he wouldn't have had a destination had he not entered the portal and left Penn State prior to Penn State playing their first playoff game. It's absurd. Like, we have to fix this. This is not that difficult. They did an adequate job of adjusting the transfer portal window. Now it opens on January 2nd to the 11th. So at least now the calendar, if you will, won't be as problematic. It really will only impact, in a bad situation, will only impact 4 teams. Those are the 4 teams that are playing in the semifinal. But the fact that it's moved to January helps, but it doesn't alleviate all concerns. If we can just move it till after the national championship, then fine. To me, we are worried about the academic calendar, and I get that, but we've already veered so far away from the world of academics, and we already have so much as it relates to online classes and things like that. Like, there are ways around that. We can fix it. Okay. We also need a separate signing day for high school players that isn't in December. Right now, the early signing period is the first week of December, and it forces coaches to go and recruit high schoolers, manage their own roster, prepare for a bowl game, prepare for a playoff game. It forces schools to fire coaches prematurely in September, October, November, just so they can have a new staff in place before they get to the signing period. All you got to do is just move signing period into June. Move it back, or you can push it back to January, February. And if a guy wants to sign and go early, by all means, go for it. But right now, it's just so much that is crammed into such a short period of time when it's fixable. Just move signing period to June. And if high schoolers sign then, the schools won't feel the same type of pressure in November to fire a coach to, quote, save the recruiting class. It would allow a coach to kind of finish the season without the threat of immediate termination or poaching or anything like that. The other thing we need to do is we need to figure out a way to implement some type of anti-tampering for coaches. Because right now there's no rules that prevent a school like LSU from interviewing and hiring a coach while his team is still playing. So if you establish a dead period for coaches until after conference championship games or after the first round of the playoffs or even the second round of the playoffs, it could be really beneficial. Because in the NFL, you can't leave your team until you've finished playing. So therefore, you shouldn't be able to talk to another coach in the regular season. Now, I know they're not always having direct conversations. It's often by way of a proxy, whether it's an agent or a coaching search guy, whatever it is. But if we could just avoid that and we have similar protections built into our governance, it would kind of protect the integrity of the postseason, and it would prevent that super awkward lame duck situation or an interim coach situation. Because think about this, and I think it was Rick Pitino that said this. It's like, so hang on a second, let me get this straight. I'm coaching at a mid-major program. I get a job offer to go become the head coach at, say, I don't know, Kentucky in basketball, but I have to leave now. I don't get to coach my team in March Madness when we won our conference, we punched our ticket to the dance, and now I got to go leave right now. This, to me, feels like it's avoidable and it can be fixed. So if we can figure out a way to adjust the calendar, that would be really helpful, because I don't ever want to see a situation where, like we've seen this year, where Lane Kiffin is not allowed to coach his team because of the conflict of interest that would exist, where he's trying to recruit against that team and very well might have some of the players on this Ole Miss team playing for him next year at LSU. If we could just move everything until after the championship, it would be really helpful, and I think it would clean things up significantly. Takeaway number 10. Okay, conference championship games are set, and we just want to make sure that you guys kind of understand what's coming up for us this week. We have a lot of really exciting conference championship games, none more exciting than the Big Ten, which features number 1 versus number 2. It's the first matchup between the top 2 teams in a conference championship game since 2009. That was when Alabama beat Florida 32-13 en route to Nick Saban's first national championship. That's also the last time a pair of 12-0 teams met in a conference title game. So this is the biggest conference championship as far as pre-game rankings and record in 16 seasons. So Indiana is trying to win the first Big Ten title since winning a share of it back in 1967. And Ohio State is back in the Big Ten championship game for the 7th time. It's their first since 2020. Think about how good Ohio State's been. And they have not played in Indianapolis since 2020, which is wild to me. They've won their last 5 conference championship game appearances. They are 5-1 overall in the Big Ten. They also just so happen to have the top 2 favorites to not just win the national championship as the teams, but the top 2 favorites to win the Heisman Trophy. And Fernando Mendoza and Julian Sayin, it will be the first conference championship between the top 2 Heisman favorites in over 15 years as well. So many tentacles to that one, so much to look forward to. The SEC, also a massive one. Alabama and Georgia, of course, win and you're in. Lose, I still think probably in the field as well. Alabama, this is their 16th appearance in the SEC championship game. That's the most by any team in any conference. They are 11-4 in those conference championship games, whereas Georgia, they have been to the SEC title game 5 straight years. That is the longest active streak by any team. They've also appeared in 8 of the last 9. And they are the reigning SEC champion as well. This is the 5th matchup between Bama and Georgia in the SEC title game. That's the 2nd most title game matchups of any duo in any league. Then Alabama has won the previous 4 in which they have teed it up against each other. 2023, 2021, 2018, and then in 2012 as well. Alabama has won 10 of the last 11 meetings against the Dogs. So big opportunity for Georgia to kind of exercise the demons, if you will, against the Tide. And if Alabama can just continue to do what they've done, they'll, of course, punch their ticket to a home playoff game more than likely. In the ACC, what was a very improbable ACC championship game based on the preseason expectations. Virginia, for example, was 100 to 1 to win the conference entering the year. Duke was 35 to 1 to win the league. Virginia would be the biggest preseason long shot to win the ACC in over 15 years. And they are seeking their first outright ACC championship and their third overall, but their first where it's just them by themselves. They got a piece of it in 89 and 95, but to win their first one would be significant. And to think, too, where Virginia was last year, they were 3-5 in the ACC. This would be the second team ever to win the ACC after finishing the previous year under 500 in conference play. That was back in 2006. It was Wake Forest. And this is their second ever appearance in the ACC title game as well. They got crushed by Clemson back in 2019. Duke's only been to 2 as well, so this is big. They got crushed by Florida State in 2013. So these two teams, note, often play in this opportunity, so a massive opportunity for both those teams to possibly make the playoff. We'll see, because Duke is the third 5-loss team to reach the ACC championship game. Georgia Tech was 6-6 in 2012. Pitt in 2018 was 6-5. Both teams lost the ACC title game, but it's the first ACC championship game to feature two teams that have never won one before since 2009. So very, very intriguing. And they've already played together this year. Virginia beat Duke back on November 15th. They won that game 34-17. And the last time Virginia beat the same opponent twice in a season was in 1906. They beat Richmond twice that year, once on October 3rd and once on October 27th. So they played each other twice in 1 month as well. They also did it in 1894. That was also against Richmond. So crazy, not normal. And Duke, if they win, there is over a 99% chance that the ACC champion will be left out of the playoff. For Duke to get in, it would need a win against Virginia, which is kind of a coin flip. The game right now is about 2.5 points. That's the line in favor of the Wahoos. They would need James Madison to lose to an 8-4 Troy, and then they'd need to be ranked ahead of Troy, and they need to be ranked ahead of the Mountain West Conference USA champion in the final playoff rankings. And if you use strength of record as kind of a proxy, Duke's resume is slightly behind Kennesaw State and the potential Mountain West champion as well. Because if you're looking at strength of record right now, UNLV is 38th, Boise State is 49th, Kennesaw State is 51st, and Troy is 66th. Duke right there is 4th out of those 5 at 59th. So metrics not on Duke's side making the playoff. So if the ACC champion's going to make it to the playoff, it needs to likely be Virginia. The Big 12, pretty clear. We've known where this was going for a bit. It's BYU against Texas Tech. It's the first Big 12 title game appearance for both teams. BYU, it's their first appearance in any conference title game since 1998. That was when they were in the WAC. And both teams are trying to win their first ever Big 12 championship. BYU's only loss this year came to Texas Tech. So it will be an interesting matchup between those two teams because they got beat badly in that game on November 8th. But of course, that game was in Lubbock. In the G5, the AAC is a playoff game. Winner is in. North Texas is going to be playing that game in New Orleans against Tulane. Conference USA, it's Kennesaw State at Jacksonville State. Miami, Ohio against Western Michigan in Detroit for the MAC. And the Sun Belt is Troy at James Madison. That'll be played in Harrisonburg, Virginia on James Madison's home field. And then finally, the Mountain West is Boise State against UNLV. So fascinating college football playoff implications in way more games involving the G5 than we've seen in the past in the event in which things go crazy and the Duke Blue Devils end up winning the ACC with the record of 8-5. That'll do it for us here at Always College Football. Continue to encourage all of you guys to like the show, to rate the show, to subscribe to the podcast wherever you get the podcast. We also encourage you to go ahead and subscribe to the ESPN College Football YouTube page. If that's where you're here today, go ahead and hit that thumbs up, and we'll have a fantastic finish to Rivalry Weekend. We're here. It's Conference Championship Week, ladies and gentlemen. Just one more full week of college football. So let's embrace it, let's enjoy it, and let's celebrate it, because we're going to miss it when it's gone come Saturday night. For all of us here at ACF, for Mark, Jake, Jack, the other Jack, intern Sam, I'm Greg. We hope you have an amazing day. And remember, it's always college football.
Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.